Hi there, my name is Katie Kavanaugh Webb, and I'm the head of Research and Instructional Services at Joyner Library. I'm here today to talk to you about journal validity and publication ethics as it pertains to your assignment and as you find ethical statements for different journals. But I have some things that I want to cover with you, some questions that you may have as you go through this process, and so that's why we're here today. First things first, when we talk about journals, we are talking about peer-reviewed journals. So what does peer-reviewed mean? And do all journals marked peer-reviewed mean the same thing? So when we talk about peer-reviewed, it means that it is a journal article or a piece of writing that was written by researchers for other researchers, which include college students. College students may also be the authors of these, but they are written by people who are initiated in that field, that are doing research. And I like to use the analogy of a conversation or a debate. So what we knew about cancer in the 50s is a lot more than we know today, and so there may be different articles that come out with more information, and as people hash those out in these written formats, it's kind of like the slowest conversation ever. So you can publish an article, but one of those articles might be found to be incorrect in the future, or there may be more added to it. And so the literature review is going to be where they talk about prior research that they are building upon. Peer-reviewed literature is almost always written at the postgraduate reading level, which means that it's not written at the level of a magazine or a newspaper. It's going to be published in academic journals, as I spoke about just a moment ago, and those are specifically aimed at researchers. They may be through professional associations or through different publishers that are publishing in that field. Specifically, peer-reviewed means that they undergo the peer review process. I'm going to show you two diagrams about what that means in a moment. But just know that it's much more stringent than the editorial process that a newspaper or magazine would go through. And you may also hear them called scholarly or academic. So on this next slide, it shows the peer review process in a timeline format as it is, as they go through it as these different researchers. So at the beginning, you see that light bulb. They have the idea, the theory, or a hypothesis. They're building on the work that they maybe have published on in the past. They may do some research, write about it, think it through. They may get the IRB if they are testing people. And then they propose an article as a manuscript. So that means that you have to have the article written before you contact the journal editor. So you'll submit the article to a journal editor, and then the journal editor will have it be reviewed by 3 to 5 experts in the field in a blind process. So you don't know who the other reviewers are. And then a decision is made to accept, revise, or reject. So they will accept it as is. They will ask the authors to make some revisions, which is quite frequent, or they'll just say this isn't really suitable for our journal, or the process was not followed correctly in your methodology or something like that. So that is a timeline of how the peer review process works for an author. But I also really liked this diagram as well, because it shows how it works with the author submitting the manuscript. It does show here an extra step. This came from a journal editor's site. It says that the author submits the manuscript, and then a manuscript assistant screens it, sends it to the managing editor. So I talked about the editorial process. It's a different process. And then the peer review process takes place, where the reviewers read through it. Usually they are also initiated in the field. They know something about it. They're PhDs themselves, or at least that they have published in that field quite a bit. And then they send it on to an editor to edit the language and the style. A decision is made, and that's sent back to the author. So there may be some back and forth between the author and editor. There may be actually some back and forth between the managing manuscript assistant and editor and the author and so on. But the peer reviewers remain blind. You never know who they were. So one thing you'll hear about is journal rankings, and this is really important as you become publishers in your own right. You publish your own materials. You're going to want to look and see what a rank of a journal is based on, it's based on a number of things. How many things are accepted into the journal, who the people on their editorial board are, perhaps, how many issues per year they have, and how prestigious and how many subscriptions there are. So a lot of things come into, why, but specifically it's how many citations other articles have for these. And so there are 3 databases that I recommend to use, and I will show you how to use those just briefly. So the first one is Journal Citation Reports, and this is kind of the gold standard, but beware. Not everything is in this database, and what I mean is not every journal is going to show up in there. Some fields are more represented than others, specifically social sciences, and you may not see things like library journals as much, or different things that we often are looking for as librarians. So just know that you have to take this with a grain of salt. If you go in there and the journal you're looking for is not represented, it does not automatically mean that it's a terrible journal or something like that. Second database that has a similar ranking, but it's done slightly different, is called Scopus. Same warning as above. It has different fields that it's maybe a little bit better for. I know the sciences are well represented in there. And then another database called Ulrich's. Now, this does not have rankings, it's just information about the journal, but you can suss out some good stuff from that. So I'm going to jump out of the PowerPoint for a moment. Actually, I'm going to see if I can pull up Joiner Library's homepage right in front of my PowerPoint here. When you look for these databases, you're going to go into what's called the database list, which is right underneath the one search box on our website. So the first one I talked about was called Journal Citation Reports. You can click on the J, and it's the 4th one down. And okay. So I've searched for a journal here, and this is a very good journal actually. It's called Psychology and Psychotherapy Theory, Research, and Practice. It's got a pretty high impact factor. It shows that, it's on a 3-point scale. So a lot of the ones that I see are usually in the 1 range, but this one's pretty high. And you can see that in the psychology literature, the clinical psychology literature, it's seen as a pretty good journal because it's above the average. You can see that it's above average on all of these different kinds of... So this is kind of showing you how the calculation is made. It says citations in 2017 to items published in 2015 and 2016, and then how many times it was cited. So that's how it came up with that journal impact factor in JCR. So each of them is calculated slightly differently, but just know that in here that's what it's citing. You can see some impact factor contributing items, some things that got cited, and then how many times it was cited, I believe, on this side here with this one being cited 11 times. So this is information that you can use to say that this is a pretty good journal to cite in. And so that's JCR, or Journal Citation Reports. I'm going to go back to the library's homepage and show you Scopus. So back here under the database list, we're going to click on S, and Scopus is going to be a few down. Got to scroll just a little bit Scopus is more sciences, but there will be some social sciences. Now here, you can search for a document, that's what it brings you to, so it's a really powerful tool if you're trying to do a systematic review where you're looking for everything on a topic. But you can also click where it says sources on the top here. Let's take that same psychology and psychotherapy theory, research, and practice from JCR and enter the title here and see if it's in here too. Looks like it is. And it shows that their cite score, which is, you know, Scopus's brand of citation analysis, is a little bit lower here, but it shows that they had 178 citations, so they may do this slightly different. So I'm going to click into here and see what their report looks like a little bit. So these are 3 different citation metrics, and I'm not going to get into those in great detail, but just know that they count. There's just a little bit different. Citation count of just 2017, and then documents cited between 2014 and 2016, so that's why those numbers are different. So just know that it shows a percentile. That means it's pretty high percentile. You know, 78th is pretty good. So those are 2 ways to tell journal citation reports, and I know this is like a really rough sketch of how to do that, but the next thing I'll show you is just more informational. It's called Ulrichs. If you click into our database list again and click on the U, it's right here under Ulrichs Web. May have spelled it wrong on the slide, I'm sorry about that. We're going to take the same title here, Psychology and Psychotherapy, Theory, Research, and Practice. It didn't come up. In this case, I'm going to cut off the end of the journal title and see if I can find it. And it brought up similar things. So this is a good reason to stop here and say, if it doesn't come up right away, please don't think that it is a bad journal right away. You can see that it was a 78th percentile one. It didn't come up here. I am going to click on just a different one just to show you what this is like, but know that the coverage for these is going to be different for each field. So I'm going to click on Psychology and Psychotherapy, and you can see some information here. Is it available online? Where is it abstracted, indexed, that kind of thing. And it also allows you to go ahead and see where, you know, how much does it cost to subscribe to it per year, things like that. So this is just informational, but it does give you an idea for a certain title what you're going to see in that journal. If it's peer-reviewed, you can get the website to the journal and click on it. I'm going to click on this one just real quick to show you something. For this one, this is the journal's web page, and one of the things that you're asked to do in this assignment is to look at the ethics information. That might be under author guidelines, so if I click that, it may talk about the author guidelines or manuscript requirements. So just know that that information is here on the web page. Contribute, again, under here. Each of these web pages is going to be slightly different. Also can go under for referees, which means peer-reviewed, and the information might be there. So in this case, the ethics guidelines for this publication are here. So just know that that information is right there. And you may have to dig a little bit on each of these web pages. Okay, I'm going to click out of Ulrichs, Scopus, and journal citation reports and move on. We will hear about these databases again in a moment. So you may have seen on the website that I just went to, and maybe in Ulrichs while I was scrolling around there, the phrase open access. And a question that we often get as librarians are, open access journals valid to publish in? So the short answer is yes, but it kind of depends on what field you're in. The sciences are especially known for their open access publishing. Social sciences maybe not as much, but as you get into your field, you'll find out more about what different researchers think about open access. So there are some benefits of open access, which I'll talk about on another slide, but a drawback of open access is that it doesn't have the funding through a association or some kind of group that would be paying for it, so the overhead costs are often covered by the research team. That means you. We do have an open access publishing fund here at Joyner Library, and I know Lapis Library has one as well. And so sometimes your university will cover for the research team and you don't have to pay out of pocket. But the reason they have to pay for that is that there are systems and publishing costs that are incurred in the process of publishing research, and open access is what it sounds like. It is not partnering with a publisher that's going to be making money off of these journals. So one major positive is that information is out there and available to the public. It's available to other researchers and not behind a paywall where you would have to pay for it. In Europe, in the European Union, they're trying to go 100% open access by January 2020. And I have a quote there from Mark Schillitz, the president of Science Europe, which is with the EU. And he says, after the 1st of January 2020, scientific publications on the results from research funded by public grants provided by national and European research councils and funding bodies must be published in compliant open access journals or on compliant open access platforms. So they're really putting their money where their mouth is. They're saying anything that was funded by taxpayer money needs to be published open access, which means that people who funded these things through their tax dollars are going to be able to read these journal articles, and they're not going to be behind a paywall where the publishers are then making money off of it. So I hope that makes sense. This is something that they are really committed to. It's really interesting to see them working with the different publishers and what will happen very soon in January 2020 as a librarian. So I mentioned this a moment ago, how to find the ethical code of conduct. My advice to you is to visit the webpage of the journal publisher, and Ulrich's Web, the journal database I went to, the third one, might also have information for you. So a question we often get as librarians is, where should I publish? And this is building off of that open access conversation. My answer is for you as burgeoning, budding publishers yourself, is to do your research. And this whole entire presentation that I'm doing today is hopefully going to show you how to do that research and where to go. So often when I'm doing my own publications, what I'll do is I'll think of what maybe the best publications are in the field, the ones that I always turn to, and go to them first, and try to see if I can get into those publications. And so I may start by formatting my journal article a certain way. APA format is usual for a library science publication. And then if I don't get into that one, I may go to another one. So just know that open access is an option for you, and this this little infographic, is showing some of the benefits of open access, but the top journals in your field might not be open access. So just know that you may get more exposure for your work in an open access journal, but that the top journals in your field might not yet be or might not be open access. So just another plug to do your research in the methods that I'm showing you today. So I have a case study, something to share with you. I got an actual email from a professor. It said, "Dear Katie, I was asked to be on the editorial board of this journal. I agreed, thinking it was one that I had published in, that was a strong peer-reviewed journal, but on further review I have questions. is this a valid journal? And then they gave the name of the journal and linked to it using hyperlink text. So I'm actually going to click on it and show you. So this was the Journal of Case Reports, Case Studies, and Clinical Trials. So it looks to be an open access journal, and I'll tell you, I did my due diligence where I looked in JCR, I looked in Scopus, and I looked in Ulrich's, and I couldn't find the name of this journal. So I went to the archive here on their page, and it said update soon. So a couple of things here. This is maybe the sign of a predatory journal. A predatory journal I'll talk about in a moment, but this was alarm bells coming off in my mind of maybe this wasn't what we thought it was. I had also never heard of Jaden Publishers before, but of course as newer researchers you may not have heard of some of the names of the publishers anyway. So, but to me those things were kind of alarm bells going off. It didn't show up in my normal sources. Their website didn't show an archive of past issues. So in this case study, I got the feeling, maybe I call it a spidey sense, my librarian spidey sense was going off, that this was a predatory journal. And so you may be asking yourself, what does that mean? Well, a predatory publisher is an opportunistic publishing venue that exploits the need to publish. So each of us researchers have to publish or perish, but offers little reward for those using their services. So they don't care about the quality. They may not do a real peer review. They may say they're doing a peer review, and their primary goal is to make money off of those open access fees. So this is kind of like hearing from a phishing scheme or something like that. And they're going to make false claims, false promises of high impact factors or indexing in certain things, but they're not. And they may engage in unethical business practices like taking the fees and doing something else with them, like running off with that money. They may not follow accepted standards or best practices of scholarly publishing. And so the reason that you want to look up the ethics statement of a journal is to avoid publishing in a predatory journal. And so you may be thinking to yourself, danger, why would I publish in an open access journal if a predatory journal might be what I'm getting into? But know that these are fairly rare, that they do come up, but that they are not as, you're going to come into contact with them less frequently than maybe it sounds like. So how would you determine a journal that would be valued by a discipline versus a predatory journal? Well, we've already talked about how to do this. Going back to our case study, this is an actual thing that I did just earlier in this week. I went and looked at their website, and I showed you guys as I was just on their website, they didn't have an archive of journal articles, and so that was raising my spidey sense. When I went to journal citation reports and I got there, nothing about that journal, but again, more coverage of certain fields than others, so I thought that's not fully a sign for this. I then went into Scopus. Scopus is pretty picky about who they put in there. They don't just put everybody in there. And so I didn't see them in Scopus, and I didn't find them in Ulrich's. So that was starting to feel a little fishy. So the last thing I did, and I didn't show this in my example here, was that I went to PubMed and I searched by the journal to see, is it indexed there? Because if it's in the medical literature, which this person came from the medical side of campus, if it's in the medical literature, it's going to show up in PubMed, and nothing showed up. So to me, that shows that this journal has never been published before, and in my opinion, it sounds like it might be a predatory journal. So there's a difference between something being open access and being asked to provide funds to cover the cost of publishing. There's a difference between finding a journal that maybe doesn't have very frequently cited materials, You're going to want to try to get into those cream of the crop journals, but not everything's going to land there. So know that that is the process by which I went through this. And you can always ask a librarian if you have questions. So your professor also asked me to talk about, as a librarian, what ethical concerns that I feel are important for authorship and publication of research. And so I just want to give you a rundown of some of the ethical issues that I see or have maybe heard of and maybe hopefully not seen in my time here as a librarian. But the ethical issues are both with the authors and then with the publishers. So we've already kind of talked about the publisher ones so far, but the ones that come from an author's side would be like fabricating the data, completely making it up. You hear about some studies that are later debunked. You also hear about plagiarism. So especially in a literature review, you might end up not correctly citing something, or you might self-plagiarize, which sounds like, how's that possible? But if you've already published something and you copy a significant amount of it and then put it into a journal article, you can actually be accused of self-plagiarism. So you actually have to cite yourself, which sounds a little funny, but citing yourself is important in that literature review process. There may be a conflict of interest. An example of this would be if you're receiving funding from a company, like a cigarette company, and then you prove that cigarettes don't cause lung cancer, that could be a conflict of interest, and you might be driven more by the money, the funding that you're getting, than by being ethical. And so an important part of submitting research, especially with humans, is going through the Institutional Review Board, which is where you fill out an IRB and you say what your processes are going to be, what the methodology is going to be, and that goes through and has an extra layer of checking before you ever even test people. So know that that might be part of the process if you end up becoming a researcher in your own right and publishing on human research. And then another thing is duplicate publication, so submitting to one journal and then submitting almost the exact same thing to another journal. It's kind of like self-plagiarism, but one of the things you'll hear, especially with conferences, is you can take the same similar presentation or poster or something to multiple different venues, as long as it's different enough or it has to do with a theme. But you can't take the same publication and publish it in one journal and then publish it in another journal almost wholesale. So know that that is not a possibility. Another ethical issue that I think is really important is authorship and author order. This comes into account when people who are professors at a university have many different graduate students working underneath of them, and they are having those graduate students engage in that research, and they're not giving them full credit. So in the case of a graduate student doing a very large amount of work, the graduate student may have earned the right to be the first author, but because the professor is maybe more well-known in the field or something like that, they put the professor's name first. So that could be an ethical issue depending on who did the most work here. And so author order, determining whose name goes in which order, is important. You may be asking yourself, who cares? Well, if you've ever done a citation in APA style, it'll say, for instance, Kavanaugh, Webb, comma, K, et al. And that means, and everybody else. So my name is the only one that shows up in that citation, and all the other authors may be left off of that citation. And so knowing that it is important to advocate for yourself in the correct author order, depending on how much work was done by the different authors. And you may have to hash that out and have some hard conversations with that. And then we also talked about predatory journals, not going through the correct peer review process, and things like that. So those are the ethical concerns that I see as being important in research. So if you have questions about this, please don't hesitate to contact a librarian. I am the liaison to the Foreign Languages and Literatures Department, as well as being the head of the department, and I can tell you that we have different librarians for different fields. We do have somebody who manages questions from the Coastal Resources Department. We have a business librarian, we have a science librarian, we have many different people who are focused in on certain fields of research, and so we can get you in touch with the correct person even if it's not me. We also do take contacts via phone, email, and we have something called Book a Librarian where you can book a 30-minute meeting with us, and so I'd love to see you at any of those. We do have text message as well, but it's really hard to give you journal articles and things via text, so I recommend going the other route. Thank you very much, and thanks for your attention. Hope you have a great day.